I had some questions about some fasteners, as well as some of the tools that I've used in some previous videos. I figured I'd take a moment and run through the more commonly used fasteners, as well as some tools that I made to, I believe, improve on some of the processes. What I have set out here are some pieces of leather that we're going to use to put some fasteners in. We'll bring those back in a minute. A couple of scrap pieces to show some tool marks. An assortment of fasteners, as well as some common tools and some uncommon tools. The one thing that we're going to need for just about any of this is going to be a punch. These can be had fairly inexpensively, and they usually come with a set of different size punches and a small wrench for changing the tip out. I have the size that we're going to use today already on here. Now, another type can also be found fairly inexpensively, and these are rotary in that they have all of the different tips already attached, and you just rotate through to find the size that you need. I'm not as big of a fan of these because it's a little harder to get further in on a large piece of leather. They have a small throat. They do work great for putting an extra hole in a belt every now and then. Now, in addition to punches, we have several tools here for setting rivets. Now, the rivets that we're talking about come in several different types. Now, these are called rapid rivets, and they come with a nice dome on each end. You can also get these with designs and in different finishes. And basically, you put them through the hole, put a cap, and then hammer these together. These are copper rivets. These have been used in saddle making and leatherwork for a really long time. Essentially, once the hole's in the leather, you place the rivet through, put a burr on the other end, drive this together, trim off the end, and then peen it over. We also have something called a Chicago screw. And essentially what this is a nice dome end on one side and a screw head on the other side. And this is good when you need to be able to take something apart and put it back together, but not as quickly or frequently as you might with a snap. So this could be used for attaching different types of belt clips to a holster or a sheath, where you may want to change them out, but you want them a little bit more secure than something that can just be easily pulled apart. Then we have snaps. Now, snaps, you can buy these at pretty much any store now, everything from Walmart to your arts and crafts store. They come in 4 pieces. And with these 4 pieces, we have a back, which is typically shaped with a tubular rivet in the middle and a large flat piece to capture the leather. The stud, which is the part that it snaps onto. A nicely domed cap, and again, these can be had with designs on them and in different finishes. And this piece has a copper or phosphor bronze ring, depending on which brand and which model you buy. And what happens is, when this goes over the stud, the ring, if we can find it, has a slight split right there. So the ring expands and then snaps down around the thinner waist of the stud. Now, if I snap these together, you could hear it snap, but I'd probably break a fingernail or stab myself with a screwdriver trying to take them back apart. It's always fun. And one of the problems that I had is some of the tools that are available don't do exactly what I'd like them to do. If you buy these snaps, you can usually buy them in 10 packs, 50 packs, etc. And they'll come with a small anvil that you can place on a desktop or on a larger anvil. One side is curved, and this will fit the dome of the snap so it doesn't flatten this out. The other side is flat, which works well for the back of the snap. They also come with a little tool, and on the package it does say to strike it with a soft mallet. I tend to hit them with a tack hammer. You can see back here. And so they deform a little bit, but I get a better purchase on it. The way that this works is it fits inside of the end of the tubular rivet, and it flares it out, and then it forces it to roll over. Now I've had some issues with these skewing or not rolling over completely or flattening out the back too much. With these, if you strike them too much, you wind up with a small flat spot where the rivet kind of caves in. So I've adapted some methods in kind of a hybrid format. We'll see that momentarily, but I had to create some tools for this. So this is the setter for rapid rivets. And essentially, it fits in there, and it's sized to fit the cap and preserve the dome. Unless you have two of these and you balance one, or you have a larger plate with a series of dome shapes in it, you're more than likely going to wind up flattening out one side. And usually that's on the back, so it's not that big of a deal. Let's go ahead and do one of these to demonstrate. One of the shortcomings I've found of these rivets is that depending on the thickness of the leather, they either wind up too long or too short. Let me go ahead and punch another piece. We'll just use that to mark it out. And I'll show you what I mean. They do come in several sizes, but getting just the right combination of leather is a little tricky. So this one would fit well here, but if we put a third piece of leather, we might find that the longer one would either just work or be too short. If we were to attach a thinner piece of leather, we see that it's probably a little bit too long. So that snaps on, and now we need to set it. This might be just the right thickness for this, but if we came back and put two of these together, you see where I'm going with this. So let me go ahead and set this with these two. You can see that they just fit together nicely. We'll set them up on our anvil. We'll give it a couple of good whacks, and you can see that the back flatted out. So if you've purchased something with these and you've seen the back is flatted out, that's exactly why. They were set against a flat surface. Now these are primarily decorative. They can be used for light duty fastening of two pieces of leather, but if you give them a sharp jerk, they pop right apart and go flying somewhere across the other side of my studio. We can see that it flatted out, and then by jerking them apart, it actually tore through the very thin material that rivet's made out of. On the other side, we have copper rivets used in saddle, in utility gear, lineman's belts, rigging of all sorts. We place it through, and to be honest with you, which side shows, it really depends on the project I'm doing and what I want the overall appearance to look like. So I'll go ahead and place the burr on there. Now this is the setter that you can buy for these. This is a craft tool. It's from Tandy. I picked this up on Amazon. It comes with a hole and then a slight domed shape. And you'll see what that's for in a minute. So you start by placing the hole over the rivet, and you may have noticed a slight taper on the end. This is to get the burr started. Once the burr goes past that taper, it's actually pretty firmly seated and flares out slightly. Okay, so we can get this seated in here. And one of the things that you may notice is that this is not fully covering the rivet, okay? So it's, as you're hammering, if you don't rotate this, you're going to wind up with lines across this. The other problem I have with this tool is, let me go ahead, and I'm not going to put a burr on this one. Let me just show you what I'm talking about. We'll place a rivet through here, and then imagine that there's a burr. If you come off center slightly, you wind up leaving a pretty nasty impression. If you try and tilt the tool over to where it only touches on that one side, you wind up with marks on your burr. So we can pop this rivet out and reuse that in a minute. So a little while back, I made a set of tools. I spun these up, and I spun them up in a couple of different sizes. This is sized for number 9 rivet, so it's a rather large hole, okay? And there are smaller rivets. There's 9s and 12s and a few other sizes. They are available in brass and copper. And what I did was I designed a nice, simple set of tools. This is a piece of tool steel. So I got some 1/2-inch tool steel, put just an arbitrary taper on the end, drilled a hole to size each of the rivets. So this is for number 9, this is for number 12. And then I made another tool to peen over the ends. So I mentioned an arbitrary angle on here, but not entirely arbitrary. If we look, this was measured to where the burr for number 9 rivet just barely fits outside of that tip. The number 12, the same thing. So essentially, when I bring these together, I can slide this tool over. We can see that it doesn't extend out far enough to damage the leather, yet it won't leave lines or marks across our rivet. We'll drive that down nice and solid. Now, as I said, this is a 1/2-inch tool steel, and I did go through a heat treat process on these. So they were hardened and then tempered, and then I relieved the backside where it's being struck, so it can be struck with a steel hammer without a risk of shattering, while this end remains nice and solid, much harder than the copper that it's being driven against. Now, once that's riveted together, there's actually a pretty good hold on there, just from the burr being forced around there. What we do next is we cut this off. Now, it can be cut in a number of different ways. You can use a pair of side cutters, a pair of end cutters, a little saw, a lot of different methods. I took a pair of side cutters, or diagonal cutters, and ground the back flat. And this prevents us from getting a pinch, basically that raised up peak. And we'll see that here in a second on the waist side. And you cut the end off. And you can see that it comes out pretty much nice and flat. This is the pinch that I was referring to a minute ago. On a regular set of diagonal cutters, you'll wind up with that taper on both sides. And this just makes it a little easier and a little faster to shape that. As I mentioned, I like a nice tack hammer, and I'm still looking for one with a round face and a tapered or almost like a cross peen end. They don't seem to make them anymore though. We'll give that a little bit of a tap just to smooth that out. Then the other tool, with the dome, we can come in and strike that down. Now that'll set it and round it off nicely. The nice thing though is no matter how hard you pull, that sucker's not coming apart. You can see it even bent the copper there a little bit, but it's just not coming apart. The other one, a single pop like that, and it shot across the studio. And in working with these instead of the rapid rivets, I started thinking about this. One of the biggest problems I had with snaps has to do with, just like with the rapid rivets, it has to do with the length of this. So if I wanted to put this snap, there's a lot sticking out there past the end of this. You really only want a little bit. So if we were to come in and use these tools that are provided to set this snap, if we look closely, let me see if we can get a shot of this. By the time that's set, it actually skewed quite a bit. All right, maybe we can see better from the back. It skewed that center rivet quite a bit, and the snap's no longer perfectly aligned. You can come through and grind the end of those off. It's kind of a pain in the butt, really. You wind up with a little burr, and then you have to clean that up, and getting exactly the right length is a little tricky. The other problem I had was in using thicker leathers. So let's go ahead and simulate this. Let's say we're going to do a heavy-duty holster or a lineman's belt or something like that. We'll go ahead and put a couple of layers together. If you're just using the regular line 20 snaps, what you may wind up having to do is putting them into a small patch panel and then stitching it to the face of the piece that you're working on. So for example, we wouldn't be able to run this snap all the way through even two pieces. If we were to try and put either side of the snap on here, you can see there's just not enough to grab onto. So what we'd have to do is put the snap through just one piece and then layer other pieces behind it and then attach this to this piece. A lot of times there's going to be stitching or some other form of attachment as well, so it's not the end of the world. My choice, however, is just to take care of it in one shot. So with these three pieces, I'll go ahead and put this rivet through. And then before I even put the snap on, I'm going to go ahead and take my rivet setter and just drive that down to make sure it's well seated, because I'm not using a burr in this case. The snap itself is going to serve as a burr. So then with that on there, we can't cut it quite as close as I normally like to. However, I found that by laying the cutters directly on top of the snap and trimming it off, the end that protrudes really isn't too bad. And that's where these come in. This is a second set that I made, essentially the same as the first ones, except I only made one set, and this is set for a number 9 rivet, which is the right size to go in a snap. And the end of it is turned down to where it fits nicely in the stud. So we can come in and seat that nicely. And then to peen it over, we can't get the hammer in there. So we have this end, again, tapered to fit. And we can come in and just hammer it until the stud stops rotating. That's peened over now, and remember how hard this was to pull apart. You can imagine that snap's never coming off of there. Now the nice thing is that this can be done on either half of the snap, and they still have enough room to go back together. At this point, if I have a snap facing outward, I've either covered it with a second piece of leather, so I've done a rivet through in between 2 layers of leather, or I'm still using these. And that's just because the end of a rivet isn't quite as attractive as the domed face of a button. I am working on making a set of rivets with a nice domed face to it Possibly in copper, more than likely also in brass. I've been using a lot of brass snaps lately. And again, it's not coming out of there. It's nicely seated, and because they come in various lengths, you can wind up going through as much leather as needed. Now, I typically buy copper rivets in the 1-inch length. This gives quite a bit left that gets cut off. However, I never have to worry about them being long enough. You'll find these in 1/2, 3/4, and 1 inch, and I think occasionally you can find them even longer than that. The nice thing about these is if you have longer ones, they can always be cut down. You don't have to worry about finding yourself too short or having to stitch an extra piece on top to accommodate the fastener.